I was born in a dark corner of a large loud family where I was never wanted from the very first cry I ever made. My father wanted a son, and when he saw me he only saw a disappointment. My mother never smiled at me, and my brothers and sisters looked at me like I was a stranger in my own home. I did not understand why I was different, but I knew from a very young age that my existence was a point of shame for them. When I was 5 years old, I remember asking my father for a small toy, and he replied with cold words, "You are waste of daughters, not blessings." My mother turned her face away and pretended not to listen to any of it. From that day I realized that love would not be my gift in this house. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into years, and I learned to live through rejection. Every meal I ate I felt like I was stealing. Every cloth I wore I thought I owed the world an apology. When I was 14 my family began to treat me like a servant. They asked me to do chores for hours and never thanked me. I was not allowed to join when they celebrated birthdays or Eid. I did not know the meaning of family bonding. It was as if I was a burden who needed to be thrown away. At 17 things became worse. One night my father came to me after an argument and shouted that I should leave his house because I was nothing but bad luck. My mother did not stop him. My siblings looked satisfied as if a stain was finally being cleaned. I had no money, no clothes except the ones I was wearing. I walked out into the night with tears burning my eyes and a heart that had already learned too much pain. For many days I wandered from one place to another. I tried to stay with relatives, but they all pushed me away. Some said they did not have space, others simply said a girl without her family was nothing but a problem. I slept hungry many nights. And I understood that in this world nobody cares for those who are weak. But fate plays strange games. One morning while working small tasks at a market I saw a newspaper headline about a lottery. I had bought a ticket weeks ago only because someone forced me at the stall. My hands trembled as I compared the numbers. Every digit matched. I had won $2 million. For a moment I thought it was a dream, but when I collected the money it was real. My life had changed overnight. Yet I did not celebrate. I decided I would keep it secret. I wanted to see who truly cared for me without knowing my wealth. So I went back quietly and started meeting people who once rejected me. I asked for help in small things. I asked for a meal. I asked for shelter. I asked if anyone could stand with me when I was alone. One by one they all refused. My uncle said they could not take responsibility. My cousins laughed at me. Even some friends turned their faces. It was as if the whole world had agreed that I was unworthy. But there was one person. My elder cousin. Sister saw me sitting hungry near her home. She gave me food without asking anything. She told me I could sleep in her small room. She encouraged me to keep fighting. She did not know about the lottery, she only saw me as a broken girl in need of kindness. That moment was the first time I realized what real love felt like. I decided I would test my entire family one by one before revealing anything. The more I asked, the more I discovered their hearts. Everyone wanted me gone except her. She stood beside me even when her parents scolded her for helping me. She said, "If no one stands with you, I will." Her words became my strength. Days kept passing and I continued my silent test. I went back to my parents' home one evening and knocked on the door with fear in my heart. My father opened the door and the look of disgust in his eyes told me the answer before he even spoke. He shouted that I had no right to return and that his daughter was dead the moment she stepped out. My mother stood behind him with no emotion on her face. She did not even whisper a word for me. I asked only for a small place to stay and promised to work for food, but they both slammed the door on me as if I was a curse. I stood outside trembling in the cold night air, and I knew in that moment blood meant nothing if hearts were empty. I left again with silent tears and walked back to the small space my cousin had given me. She saw me shivering and covered me with her own blanket even though she had only one. That act of selfless love kept me alive. I wanted to tell her about the money, but I kept my promise to myself. I had to be certain who was true. One by one I went to every relative. I went to my uncle who owned a large house and asked if I could just help in cleaning for a little shelter, but he told me I was a shameful burden and locked his gate. I went to my aunt who had often used my labor when I was younger, but she laughed at me and said no one wanted an abandoned daughter in their house. Each rejection felt like a knife, but each knife also made me stronger. I began to understand the world more clearly. People respect wealth, not humanity. Yet every time I returned to my cousin she smiled and told me not to give up. She shared her food, her clothes, and her courage. Slowly, I realized she was the only shining light in my darkest tunnel. Then one day I tested my siblings. I asked my brother for help when he saw me on the street. He was with his friends, and he pushed me away like I was dirt on his shoes. My sister looked at me in the market and pretended not to know me. I thought, maybe at least one of them would offer a kind word, but there was nothing. Only silence and rejection. In that moment the truth of my family became clearer than ever before. They never saw me as blood, they only saw me as a mistake. But life had already turned in my favor. I had millions hidden safely in my account. I was no longer weak. I started planning. I would build a life not from their pity but from my strength. Yet before doing that I wanted to test the very last circle of people around me. I went to some old school friends and asked if I could stay for just one night. Some gave excuses, some laughed, some pretended not to remember me. Only one old friend offered me tea, but even she asked me to leave after an hour. I smiled to myself. Because I finally had my answer. The entire world had failed me except one person. My cousin. Her name was Amina. She was not rich, she was not powerful, she was not famous. She only had a heart that could see pain and respond with kindness. And that heart was worth more than all the money in the world. When I was sure, I decided to change. I began to wake up every morning with new determination. The city streets that once looked cruel now looked like open maps waiting for me to draw my path. I still wore the same simple clothes and pretended to be the girl with nothing. This disguise gave me power because I could see the real faces of people when they believed I was helpless. Day by day I wrote down names in my notebook, those who rejected me, those who insulted me, those who turned their backs. I also wrote one name on a separate page, Amina. Her name alone filled my notebook with hope. In chapter 15 of my life I started planning the future. I went to see properties, small shops, empty houses, broken buildings. I asked prices as if I was curious. The sellers treated me like a poor dreamer who could never afford anything. They laughed, they ignored me, they waved me away. Inside I smiled because one day soon I would buy not one but many of those places and I would not forget the way they treated me. In chapter 16 I tested myself. I wanted to see if wealth had already changed my heart. I walked into a bakery and saw a little child begging for bread. The shopkeeper shouted at him to leave. Without hesitation I bought 2 loaves and gave them to him. His eyes sparkled like stars, and in that moment I knew money would never control me, I would control money. In chapter 17 my cousin Amina became sick. She had fever and no medicine. She was too weak to work and yet she still smiled at me. My heart broke. I secretly paid for a doctor under a fake name and medicine arrived at her door as if sent by angels. She never knew it was me. I wanted her to heal because she deserved every blessing. In chapter 18 I faced my darkest memory. I saw my mother again in the market. She looked at me as if I was a stranger and whispered to another woman that daughters who bring shame should vanish. Her words burned in my soul, but instead of tears, I felt fire of ambition. I promised myself I would rise so high that one day they would regret every cruel word. In chapter 19 I started investing small amounts quietly. I bought shares, small lands, and kept everything hidden. No one knew the poor girl walking in the streets was secretly turning into a queen of her own empire. Every coin I spent was like a seed that would grow into a tree. In Chapter 20, the test reached its final stage. I met all my relatives once more, but this time I looked into their eyes differently. They still rejected me, still insulted me, still laughed. But now I did not feel pain. I only felt freedom. Because I knew their judgment had no power over me anymore. The truth was written. They had failed me forever, and only Amina had passed. The world was about to change, but only I knew the storm that was coming. I began to design my second life, the life of a hidden millionaire still living as a forgotten daughter. I started visiting libraries, reading about business, about how empires were built and how they were destroyed. Every page felt like a weapon being added to my hands. Knowledge was power, and power was my silent shield. In Chapter 22, I returned to the small bakery where the child had once begged. This time I saw many children standing outside hungry. My heart could not accept it. I secretly paid the baker every week so no child would ever be turned away again. Still, no one knew it was me. People thought some kind stranger was helping them, but I carried that secret with pride. In Chapter 23, rumors began to spread among my relatives. They wondered how I always had food, how I never begged, how I never broke down. Some whispered that maybe I had found work in the city, others said maybe I was hiding something. Their curiosity grew, but none dared to show kindness. They wanted only gossip, not truth. In Chapter 24, I stood in front of a broken house. The roof leaked, the walls cracked, everyone avoided it. But I saw gold where others saw dust. I bought it quietly through a fake identity and began to repair it. Day by day, that broken house became strong and beautiful. When neighbors saw it, they were shocked. They never imagined the poor girl could rebuild a home like that. In Chapter 25, my cousin Amina finally asked me a question. She said, "Sister, how do you survive when everyone rejects you?" I looked into her eyes and said, "Because I believe in myself even when no one else does." She smiled, and for the first time I felt someone truly understood me. In Chapter 26, I faced a dangerous test. One of my uncles came to me pretending to offer help. He said he would give me a place to stay, but in exchange I must serve his family day and night. I looked into his eyes and saw greed, not love. I refused with courage. He became angry and told the whole family that I was ungrateful. They all believed him. Yet I did not care. I had my own path. In Chapter 27, a miracle happened. The investments I had made secretly began to grow. The small lands doubled in value, the shares gave profits, and suddenly my hidden fortune became larger than I ever imagined. I stood in the middle of the night looking at the stars and whispered, "One day soon the world will see who I truly am." But until that day I will remain silent, because silence is my greatest weapon. The village began to notice that something about me was different. My clothes were simple but always clean, my steps were steady, my eyes carried confidence. People whispered behind my back, wondering how a rejected daughter could carry herself with such strength. They did not know that every whisper only made me stronger. In Chapter 29, I decided to test my family's hearts once more. I went to my elder brother and asked for a small loan, pretending I was desperate. He looked at me with coldness and said he had nothing to give. Yet the next day I saw him spend money on useless things. My heart did not break anymore. I simply smiled because his test was written in my destiny. In Chapter 30, I found a chance to help a widow who had 3 children. She worked day and night but still struggled to buy bread. I gave her money secretly, enough to change her life. She wept in prayer but never knew who saved her. I stood in the shadows and felt the sweetness of unseen kindness. In Chapter 30, my hidden investments bore more fruit. One of the lands I had bought cheaply was discovered to have resources underground. Its price multiplied beyond imagination. I knew now I was no longer just lucky, I was chosen for something greater. In Chapter 32, my youngest cousin, a girl named Sarah, came crying to me. She said her parents wanted to marry her to a cruel man only because of money. I held her hands and promised I would not let her be destroyed like that. I used my hidden power and found a way to save her, arranging her education instead. She looked at me with gratitude so pure it felt like light entering my soul. In chapter 33, I heard my family talking one evening. They said perhaps throwing me away was the right choice, because I was cursed, because I was weak. I sat quietly in the distance, my heart calm. They could not see that the daughter they had thrown out was already richer and stronger than all of them combined. Their blindness was my shield. In chapter 34, the city lights called me again. I visited a business meeting secretly, dressed simply but carrying silent authority. I listened, I learned, and I made connections. None of them knew who I truly was. To them I was just another girl eager to learn. But deep inside I knew I was preparing for a storm that would one day shake not only my family but everyone who ever doubted me. The nights became longer for me because my dreams started burning brighter. I no longer dreamed of just surviving. I dreamed of building an empire so strong that no rejection could ever touch me again. Each night I wrote plans, drew maps of ideas, and whispered to myself that I was born for more. In chapter 36, my mother crossed my path in the market. She saw me buying bread with calmness and dignity. Her eyes searched mine, but I lowered my gaze. She did not speak, and neither did I. For a moment I felt the old wound, but then I remembered I was no longer the same abandoned daughter. I was a storm waiting to rise. In chapter 37, I took a bold step. I bought another piece of land, this time in the city. People mocked me for wasting money, thinking I was foolish. But I had studied enough to know its value would rise soon. Their laughter was a gift to me because it hid my true intentions. In chapter 38, I helped a sick old man who was thrown out by his sons. I gave him shelter secretly and treated him like my own father. He held my hands with tears and said, "May the world one day know your worth." His blessing felt heavier than gold. In chapter 39, my relatives began to feel uneasy. They could not understand how I was still standing while they expected me to fall. They saw small signs of my progress, they whispered questions, but no one dared ask me directly. Their confusion was my invisible crown. In chapter 40, a letter arrived at my door. It was from a stranger who had noticed me at the business meeting in the city. He wrote that he admired my courage and wanted me to join a bigger project. My heart pounded with both fear and excitement. This was not just survival anymore, it was the beginning of transformation, the moment where the forgotten daughter would step onto a path that could change everything forever. Point 1, I sat with the letter in my hands for hours, thinking whether to accept the stranger's offer or not. Trust was a luxury I could not afford, but opportunity was something I had learned never to ignore. Finally, I decided to reply, with cautious words that would protect my secret yet open the door to something new. In chapter 42, I traveled quietly to the city for the meeting. The stranger was a woman, older and sharp-eyed, with a presence that demanded respect. She said she had seen in me the hunger for growth that few carried. She wanted me to partner with her in a trade business. My heart trembled, but I agreed, knowing that every big step begins with fear. In chapter 43, I worked day and night, learning the ropes of trade. Ships, goods, buyers, sellers, everything was new, but I absorbed knowledge like dry earth drinking rain. The woman tested me, sometimes harshly, but I never broke. She began to trust me more with each passing week. In chapter 44, I returned to my village for a short visit. The same people who once ignored me now looked at me differently. They did not know why, but something in my walk and in my silence made them restless. My family still avoided me, but their eyes followed me with suspicion and hidden curiosity. In chapter 45, my younger cousin Sarah, whom I had once helped, came running to me with joy. She told me she had passed her exams with high marks. She hugged me and whispered that she would never forget what I had done for her. That moment filled my heart with a sweetness no wealth could buy. In chapter 46, the business began to bloom. We started earning more than we expected. The woman said to me, "You are not ordinary, you are meant to build something even bigger." I felt the truth in her words but kept my secret treasure hidden, because my family's test was not yet over. In chapter 47, one evening while walking home, I heard my brother speaking with neighbors. He complained that life was unfair, that money never stayed with him, and then he cursed my name as if I was the reason for his failures. I smiled. In the darkness. He had no idea that the sister he cursed was slowly becoming more powerful than anyone in the family had ever dreamed. I began to sense that my journey was moving from silence into light. People who once pushed me aside now whispered my name with both doubt and awe. They could not understand how the abandoned daughter had risen, and their confusion was my shield. In chapter 49, the woman I worked with invited me to a gathering of powerful traders. The hall was filled with men who laughed at my presence, questioning why a young girl had been brought among them. I sat quietly, listening, and when my turn came I spoke with calm strength. By the end of the night their laughter had turned into respect, for I showed them numbers and ideas they could not deny. In chapter 50 my heart longed for something deeper than wealth or success. I began writing in my secret journal every night, asking myself what true happiness meant. Was it proving my worth, or was it finding love, or was it forgiving those who broke me? My questions had no answers, but they kept me awake with a burning restlessness. In chapter 51 my uncle, the same man who once mocked me, came to my house. He spoke softly for the first time in years, asking if I could lend him money. I looked at his trembling hands and remembered his cruelty. I told him gently that I could not, and for the first time he tasted the same rejection I had once felt. In chapter 52, I found myself standing on the hill outside the village at sunset. The sky burned with orange and red, and I whispered to the wind that I would no longer live in their shadows. I was building a new identity, not just for myself, but for every girl who had ever been silenced. In chapter 53 rumors began to spread that I had hidden wealth. Some said I was lucky, others said I was cursed. My family argued among themselves about me, but none of them dared to approach. Their silence was my fortress. In chapter 54, I received another letter. This one unsigned. It said, "I know your secret, I know about the money you hide, and soon everyone else will know too." My hands shook as I read it. The peace I had guarded so carefully was about to be tested in a way I had never imagined. I hid the letter beneath my pillow and lay awake the whole night. My mind raced with fear and questions. Who could know my secret? Who was watching me in silence? The thought of being exposed made my chest tighten, yet a strange determination rose within me. I had not survived everything just to fall now. In chapter 56 I began observing everyone around me carefully. My neighbors, my cousins, even the woman I worked with. Every glance seemed suspicious, every smile looked like a mask hiding curiosity. I realized the game had changed. It was no longer just about wealth, it was about trust and betrayal. In chapter 57 I decided to test my family. I approached my brother casually and told him I might be facing a problem. His reaction was exactly what I feared. He smirked and said I deserved whatever came my way. Not a drop of concern. Not a word of comfort. His heart was as cold as ever. In chapter 58 I met Sarah again, the cousin who once stood by me. She noticed my pale face and asked if I was fine. I wanted to tell her everything but fear stopped me. Instead, I asked her if she believed that secrets could destroy people. She nodded slowly and whispered, "Only if the wrong eyes see them." Her words lingered in my mind for hours. In chapter 59 I received a second letter. This time it was placed at my doorstep in the early morning. It said, "If you want your secret safe, meet me alone at the old bridge tomorrow after sunset." My hands trembled as I read those words, but deep inside I knew this confrontation was inevitable. In chapter 60 I prepared myself for the meeting. I wore simple clothes, carried no valuables, and prayed silently for strength. My footsteps echoed on the wooden planks of the bridge as the night fell. The wind was cold and sharp. A figure stepped out of the shadows, it was not a stranger, it was someone from my own family. In chapter 61, the moonlight revealed the face of my sister. She looked at me with eyes full of fire and whispered, "I know everything, and if you do not share it with me, I will make sure the whole world knows your truth." My heart stopped, for betrayal had now come not from outside but from within my own blood. I stood frozen on the bridge as my sister's words pierced through me like knives. Her voice carried both anger and envy, and I realized she was not here to understand me but to claim what she believed was hers. In chapter 63, I tried to reason with her. I told her the money was not just luck, it was a test of who truly cared, and that I had hidden it not to hurt anyone but to protect myself. But she only laughed bitterly and said, "You always thought you were different, now you will learn what it costs to keep secrets." In chapter 64, she demanded half of everything I owned. My chest burned with pain, not because of her demand, but because of the emptiness in her eyes. She was my sister, my blood, yet in that moment she was a stranger driven by greed. In chapter 65, I walked away from the bridge without answering. My heart pounded but my steps did not falter. Behind me she shouted threats, swearing she would expose me. The night swallowed her voice, but inside me fear and sorrow grew heavier. In chapter 66, I spent the following days in silence, expecting at any moment for the world to know my secret. Yet no storm came, no whispers spread. My sister had kept quiet, for now. That silence frightened me more than open betrayal, for it meant she was waiting for the right moment. In chapter 67, I realized I could no longer live in the shadows of fear. I began strengthening myself, investing my money wisely, building connections outside the family, creating a shield that no betrayal could fully destroy. Each step I took reminded me that I was not that abandoned daughter anymore, I was someone stronger. In chapter 68, I stood again at the hill where I had once whispered to the wind. This time I raised my voice and said aloud, "If they try to break me, they will learn I am unbreakable." The sky answered with silence, but deep inside my heart, a flame of courage burned brighter than ever before. I woke up one morning to find my neighbors staring at me strangely. Their whispers followed me like shadows in the street. My heart sank, I knew my sister had spoken. She had not exposed the whole truth, but enough to paint me as someone hiding a mysterious fortune. In chapter 70, I confronted her. She smiled coldly and said, "I told them only pieces. The rest depends on how you treat me. If you give me what I ask, I will stay silent. If not, the world will know everything." Her words felt like poison. Yet I refused to bow down. In chapter 71, I tried to warn her. I told her that greed destroys more than it gives, and that money earned through betrayal only brings misery. She laughed and said, "Misery is already in our blood, you just tried to escape it. I will not let you escape alone." In chapter 72, I began planning for the inevitable storm. I shifted some of my savings into secret accounts, bought land under another name, and quietly prepared to vanish if things became too dangerous. Each step was painful, but survival demanded sacrifices. In chapter 73, I found solace in the company of Sarah again. She did not ask for details but simply stood beside me, reminding me that not every bond was poisoned by greed. Her presence gave me the strength to continue. In chapter 74, a rumor spread that I had married a wealthy man who gave me everything. People whispered behind my back, judging me without truth. I knew exactly where the rumor started from. My sister's lips. She wanted to destroy my dignity before touching my fortune. In chapter 75, I decided something I never thought I could. I would no longer defend myself silently. If they came for me with lies, I would rise with truth. My heart trembled, but a voice inside whispered, "The time has come to fight not just for survival but for honor." I walked into the marketplace where whispers usually followed me. This time I raised my head high and ignored the stares. Every step felt like a battle against invisible chains. People who once dismissed me as nothing now looked at me with suspicion and curiosity. In chapter 77, I overheard two women saying I had sold myself for wealth. My chest tightened with anger, but I kept moving. I realized that silence was no longer strength, it was surrender. In chapter 78 I wrote a letter to the community leader, explaining that my wealth was from a lottery I had won, not from shameful acts. I didn't tell him the full amount, but I gave enough proof to silence their lies. For the first time I dared to put my truth into words. In chapter 79 my sister found out what I had done. She came to my house furious, shouting that I had ruined her plan. Her eyes burned with hatred as she swore that she would never forgive me for choosing truth over silence. In chapter 80 I told her that forgiveness was not mine to beg for, and that love cannot be forced by threats. My words only enraged her more, and she spat on the ground before storming away. That night I couldn't sleep, fearing what she might do next. In chapter 81 strange things began to happen. One morning I found the gate of my house broken, as if someone had tried to enter. Another evening I noticed shadows following me on the street. The fear of betrayal turned into the fear of danger. In chapter 82 I stood in my room staring at the locked door, my heart racing. I whispered to myself, they want to break me, but I will not bend. This story is no longer about money, it is about survival, honor, and the strength to rise. When even blood turns into enemies, I realized the silence of the night had changed. It was no longer calm, it was threatening. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind felt like someone watching me. My hands shook when I locked the windows, but my heart whispered that danger was already inside my world. In chapter 84 I visited Sarah, hoping to find peace in her presence. She listened quietly as I told her about the broken gate, the shadows, the whispers. Her eyes widened with fear, but she held my hand and said, "You cannot fight shadows alone. Promise me you will not stay silent anymore." Her words struck deep. In chapter 85 the next day, I found a note slipped under my door. The letters were uneven, written in haste, "Give up what you hide or watch everything crumble." My blood ran cold. It was not signed, but I knew whose hand it was born from. In chapter 86 I burned the note in a small flame and swore I would not let fear guide me. Yet the smoke carried my doubt into the air, reminding me that fire could destroy or protect, depending on how I used it. In chapter 87 my sister confronted me again, but this time she was not alone. Two men stood behind her, their eyes sharp, their bodies tense. She said with a cruel smile, "The world knows pieces, but I know the whole truth. Give me what I deserve, or you will regret holding on." In chapter 88 I stood frozen, every memory of pain returning at once, the night I was thrown out, the years of hunger, the tears no one saw. Then something changed. My fear turned into a calm. Fire. I told her, "You will never own my soul, no matter what you try to take." The men behind her shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure of the storm rising in my voice. In chapter 89 that night I sat alone under the dim light of a single lamp, my heart heavy but unbroken. The battle had moved beyond money. It was no longer about family or betrayal. It was about proving to myself that I could stand, even when the ground beneath me tried to collapse. And I knew this was only the beginning of a much darker war. I woke up to the sound of heavy knocking on my door. My chest tightened as fear surged through me, but when I opened it, I found no one there. Only a small box lay on the ground. Inside was a broken chain, rusted and sharp. A message carved crudely on the metal read, "You can't escape." My hands trembled, but I refused to let them see my weakness. In chapter 91 I decided to visit the police station. I explained about the shadows, the threats, the note, and now the box. The officer looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Without proof, we can't help you." His words felt like another betrayal. Even the law had turned into silence. In chapter 92 I returned home and locked myself inside, sinking to the floor. Tears rolled down my face as I whispered, "Why do they hate me so much?" I had given nothing but silence, yet silence was never enough. Suddenly, I remembered Sarah's words, "Do not fight shadows alone." That memory became my strength. In chapter 93, I gathered every letter, every piece of evidence, the note, the broken gate, the box. I made copies and hid them in different places. If they wanted to erase me, I would make sure the truth lived longer than my breath. In chapter 94, my sister came again, her voice softer this time. She said, "Stop fighting me, we are blood. If you give me what I want, I will protect you." I looked into her eyes and saw no love, only hunger. I told her, family without love is nothing but strangers carrying the same name. She flinched, as if my words had cut deeper than any blade. In chapter 95, that night Sarah visited me again. She brought food and warmth into my lonely home. She sat beside me and whispered, "Even if the whole world turns against you, remember that one heart still beats for you." Her kindness was like sunlight breaking through endless storms. In chapter 96, I stood before the mirror, staring at my reflection. For years I had seen a broken girl, unwanted and unloved. But tonight, I saw someone else, someone who had survived hunger, betrayal, and fear. Someone who would no longer bow. I whispered to my reflection, "The war has only begun, but I am ready." The night was restless, filled with the sound of footsteps outside my window. I held my breath and pressed my back to the wall, listening. The shadows moved like hunters circling their prey. My heart beat faster, but I stayed silent, refusing to let them hear my fear. In chapter 98, the next morning I found a red mark on my door, drawn with paint or maybe blood. It was a warning, a message to break me. I touched it with my trembling hand, but instead of fear, I felt anger rising in my chest. They wanted me weak, but every mark they left only carved my strength deeper. In chapter 99, I decided to confront my sister directly. I went to her house uninvited. Walking through the cold halls where I once begged for a place. She appeared at the top of the stairs, shocked to see me standing tall. I said, "Enough of your games. If you want my silence, you will have to destroy me completely." Her face twisted with rage, but beneath it I saw something else, a fear. In chapter 100, that night Sarah warned me that danger was closer than ever. She begged me to leave town, to hide until things calmed down. But I shook my head. Running had been my life's curse, and I refused to repeat it. I told her, "This is my ground. I will not abandon it again." In chapter 101, a storm broke over the city. Rain slammed against the windows as thunder roared. I sat with the box of my secrets, every dollar of the lottery still hidden, untouched. I realized the money was no longer the true battle, it was the proof of who cared. When I had nothing, it was the mirror that exposed hearts. In chapter 102, I heard glass shatter downstairs. My body froze for a second, then fire rushed through my veins. They had come. I picked up the iron rod I kept near the door, my hand steady now. No more hiding. No more begging. This was my war. In chapter 103, the living room lights flickered as shadows entered. My sister stood among them, her voice sharp like a blade. She said, "Tonight ends your story." I looked straight into her eyes and replied, "No, tonight begins mine." And for the first time in years, I felt alive, even standing face to face with the storm. The storm raged outside while my sister and her allies filled the room. Their faces twisted with greed and hate. I gripped the iron rod tighter, my knuckles turning white. My sister sneered, "You were always weak, always begging. Tonight I will take everything, even your breath." Her words cut deep, but instead of breaking me, they lit fire in my veins. In chapter 105, I swung the rod as one of her men lunged at me. The clash echoed through the house. My body shook with adrenaline, fear and fury blending into something unstoppable. For years I had cried silently, now every tear turned into strength. In chapter 106, Sarah appeared at the doorway, her voice loud and firm. She screamed at them to stop, but they ignored her, pushing forward like wolves. She ran to my side, standing between me and danger. For a moment I saw in her the family I had always dreamed of, someone who chose me when no one else did. In chapter 107, the fight grew darker. One man grabbed me from behind, his grip like iron, but I bit down on his arm and broke free. My sister's eyes widened with disbelief. She had expected me to fall, not to rise. She shouted, "You're nothing without us." But I roared back, "I was nothing with you." In chapter 108, the storm outside shattered a window, lightning flashing across the room, painting us all in white fire. In that flash I saw fear in their eyes, not mine. For the first time they realized I would not be there. Victim again. My voice shook the silence as I said, "This house is no longer cursed with your cruelty." In chapter 109, Sarah pulled me toward the back door, urging me to escape, but I stopped. Running was no longer my answer. I turned back to face my sister, who now stood alone, her followers backing away. The storm had scattered their courage. Only her hate remained. In chapter 110, I stepped forward until we were face to face. I whispered so only she could hear, "Family is not blood, it is love. And you have none." Her expression cracked for the first time, anger, pain, and something almost like regret flickered across her face. But I didn't stay to see more. I walked out into the storm, Sarah beside me, leaving behind the chains of a broken past. The storm had passed, but my heart still carried thunder. Sarah and I walked through the empty streets, rainwater soaking our clothes, yet inside me a strange peace was rising. I had broken chains that haunted me since childhood. In chapter 112, we found shelter in an old guest house at the edge of town. The keeper looked at us with suspicion but said nothing when Sarah handed him money. Inside the dim room, she held my hands and whispered, "You fought for yourself tonight, but remember, you don't have to fight alone anymore." Her words warmed the coldness inside me. In chapter 113, I couldn't sleep. Memories of my sister's face replayed in my mind. Her eyes had cracked when I told her she had no love. For the first time, I wondered if she too was a prisoner of her own hate, if maybe she had scars hidden deeper than mine. But pity could not erase the wounds she gave me. In chapter 114, Sarah convinced me to think about the future. She asked, "What will you do now with everything you carry?" I stared at the ceiling, the answer heavy on my lips. I said slowly, "I will rebuild, not just for myself, but for anyone who was ever cast aside. My pain must not end only in survival, it must grow into something brighter." In chapter 115, the morning came with golden light breaking through dark clouds. For the first time in years, I felt that sunlight belonged to me too. We walked through the market, buying simple food. People smiled at us without knowing our battles, and I realized that sometimes healing begins when strangers show kindness more than family ever did. In chapter 116, Sarah told me her own story, of loneliness and betrayal, of being left behind by people she trusted. Listening to her, I understood why she stood with me. She too had been broken, and together our broken pieces made something stronger. In chapter 117, as the sun set, I wrote in a small notebook I had carried for years. On the first page I had once written only pain and anger. That night, I wrote a promise instead, "My story is not about what was taken from me, but about what I will build from nothing." And for the first time, my hand did not tremble as I wrote. That days passed quietly, yet silence carried weight. Though we had found peace in the guest house, every night I felt eyes on me, as if the world had not forgiven me yet. Sarah noticed my unease and asked, "Do you think this battle is over?" I shook my head, because battles of the heart never end with one storm. In chapter 119, a letter arrived, slipped under the door just like before. My chest tightened when I picked it up. But this one was different. It read, "Not everyone who stood against you is your enemy. Seek truth, or regret will burn deeper than hate." There was no name. My mind spiraled. Who had written it? A warning or a trap? In chapter 120, Sarah told me to throw it away, but my soul told me otherwise. All my life I had lived in half-truths. Abandoned by those who should have loved me. Maybe, finally, the truth was reaching out. I decided to follow the lead. In chapter 121, we left the guest house at dawn, carrying only what we needed. The road stretched ahead, and with every step, memories returned: the night of my exile, the years of hunger, the faces that turned away. Yet, now I walked not as a victim but as someone choosing his path. In chapter 122, we reached an old part of the city where the walls were cracked and time seemed slower. There I met a man who claimed to know my father's secrets. His eyes were heavy with history. He said, "Your family's cruelty did not begin with you. It began long before, with debts of pride and betrayal." My breath caught, because deep inside I had always felt my pain was not born only from me. In chapter 123, he told me of a hidden story: how greed had poisoned the bloodline, how promises were broken, and how children became sacrifices for sins they never committed. Every word was a blade, but it was a blade, carving truth out of darkness. Sarah held my hand tightly, grounding me as the weight of revelation tried to crush me. In chapter 124, I walked out into the night with my mind burning. For years I thought my suffering was because I was unworthy of love. But now I realized it was part of a chain that had to be broken. And I swore under the stars, I would be the one to end that chain, even if it cost me everything. I could not sleep that night. The old man's words echoed inside me like thunder. My family's betrayal was not only personal, it was generational. It was as if I had been chosen, unwillingly, to carry centuries of poisoned pride. In chapter 126, Sarah tried to calm me, reminding me that truth is not a curse but a weapon. Yet I felt torn: was I strong enough to carry this weapon, or would it cut me apart before I could use it? In chapter 127, I returned to the man, demanding details. His voice was low, but his words shook me. He said my father once made a choice that condemned not only himself but all of us. He chose power over loyalty, gold over love, and since then, every child in the family carried the weight of that betrayal. In chapter 128, my chest burned with fury. For years I had been treated as less than human, yet I realized they were only repeating the curse of pride passed down to them. They thought they were punishing me, but they were only prisoners themselves. In chapter 129, I swore in front of Sarah that I would not let this chain continue. If I must be the last to suffer, then so be it. My pain would end with me, and no child after me would carry it. Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she whispered, "You are not ending pain, you are planting hope." In chapter 130, I wrote letters to those who had hurt me, letters I never planned to send. In them I poured every wound, every scar, every truth I had carried. Writing them felt like opening my chest and letting the poison flow out. For the first time, my soul felt lighter. In chapter 131, I stood on the edge of the river at dawn and burned the letters. The flames rose like voices of the past, crying out before turning to ash. I whispered to the wind, "This ends with me." And in that moment, I was no longer the poor abandoned child. I was the woman who had broken the curse. I walked through the streets of the city one last time, no longer as the girl who was cast out, but as someone who carried her own destiny. People looked at me and I felt no fear, no shame, only strength. The years of pain had carved me into something unbreakable. In chapter 133, Sarah and I visited the graveyard. I stood before the silent stones, thinking of those who had gone before me, those whose choices had shaped my suffering. For a long time, I said nothing, then whispered, "I forgive you, but I will never be you." It was not weakness, it was freedom. In chapter 134, my family tried once more to reach me. They had heard of my fortune, my growth, my survival. They came with sweet words and hollow apologies, but my heart no longer bent toward their shadows. I told them calmly, "You lost me the day you chose pride over love. Now I belong to a future that does not include your chains." In chapter 135, they left with anger in their eyes, but it no longer pierced me. Their power over me had died the day I chose myself. I walked away with Sarah, our hands clasped, our steps steady. In chapter 100. And 36, I began building what I had once dreamed of, a home for the abandoned, a shelter for those who had been thrown away by the very families meant to protect them. Each wall we raised, each room we filled, felt like stitching my broken heart into something whole. In chapter 137, children laughed in the halls of that shelter. Their joy became my inheritance, their freedom my victory. Looking at them, I realized the girl who had once cried in the dark was gone. In her place stood a woman who had turned pain into light. In chapter 138, the final chapter, I sat by the window as the sun dipped into the horizon. Sarah leaned against me, her hand warm in mine. The world outside was still cruel, still harsh, but inside me there was peace. My story was not about money, nor revenge, it was about survival, about choosing love where none was given, about building hope where none existed. And as the last light of day faded, I smiled, because I knew, I was no longer the girl who was unloved. I was the woman who had learned to love herself, and that was the greatest victory of all. Life is not defined by the family we are born into, but by the choices we make when life gives us nothing but pain. The story of this young girl was not simply about her rejection or the cruelty she faced from her parents and siblings. It was about how, in the deepest darkness, she found the strength to create her own light. When we look at her journey, we realize that her suffering was not the end of her story, it was the beginning of her transformation. Many people give up when they are abandoned. They believe that if their own blood refuses to stand beside them, then no one ever will. But this girl's life reminds us that love and kindness are not always tied to blood. True love comes from actions, from empathy, from standing by someone when they are at their weakest. When her own family closed the door on her face, it was Sarah, a distant relative, almost a stranger, who offered her shelter, food, and dignity. That one act of kindness was like a seed planted in the dry soil of her heart. And from that seed, hope grew. This story teaches us an important truth: people will show you who they are, not with their words, but with their actions. Her family used words of hate, rejection, and humiliation. But Sarah used the action of kindness. That is why, in the end, Sarah became her true family. It is a lesson for all of us: blood does not make someone your family, loyalty does. Another lesson we learn from this story is about the hidden potential within us. The girl was thrown out of her house with nothing. She had no money, no home, no support. But in that emptiness, she discovered her strength. It was not the $2 million that made her powerful. It was the way she used that money, the patience to hide it, the wisdom to test those around her, and the courage to build her life slowly without seeking revenge. Wealth alone does not change people. What changes people is their mindset, their discipline, and their choices. If she had wasted her fortune on luxuries or revenge, her story would have ended in tragedy. But because she chose to invest in herself, to educate herself, to grow silently, she turned her suffering into success. This is the message for anyone who feels broken: your pain is not your prison, it is your fuel. So often, we complain about the unfairness of life. We say, why me? Why do I have to suffer while others live easily? But what if suffering is the fire that shapes us into steel? What if rejection is the storm that teaches us how to stand tall? The girl in this story proves that pain can be the very thing that makes us stronger than those who rejected us. In the middle of her journey, she was tested again and again. Her family accused her of dishonor, her neighbors whispered about her, and her own sister tried to destroy her reputation. Yet she did not break. This shows us that once you know your own worth, the noise of others cannot destroy you. People will always talk. They will criticize when you are poor, and they will criticize when you are rich. They will criticize when you fail, and they will criticize when you succeed. So why live for their approval? Why let their opinions decide your worth? This girl chose not to let their voices control her. Instead, she created her own path. That is why she became free. The biggest victory in her story was not the money, nor the shelter she built for children, nor even the forgiveness she gave her family. The biggest victory was her ability to love herself. From the beginning, she had been told she was worthless, unwanted, a burden. If she had believed those lies, her story would have ended on the streets, forgotten. But she refused to believe them. She chose to believe in her own worth, even when no one else did. That is the secret. The world only values those who value themselves first. This story motivates us to ask, who are we when everything is taken from us? Are we still strong enough to fight? Can we still rise when no hand reaches to lift us up? The answer must be yes. Because as long as we breathe, we have the power to create change. The girl's decision to build a shelter for abandoned children is another powerful message. She could have spent her life chasing revenge. She could have mocked her family when she became wealthy. She could have shouted to the world about how wrong they were. But instead, she chose compassion. She remembered the pain of being alone, and she turned it into the reason to save others from the same fate. That is what greatness looks like, not power, not money, but the ability to turn your scars into healing for others. Her story tells us that every wound can be transformed into wisdom. Every rejection can become redirection. Every fall can prepare us for a greater rise. She was thrown out of her home because her family thought she was a burden. But in the end, she created a home for children who had no one. She became the very thing she once longed for, a protector, a provider, a source of love.